Welcome, I am Fernanda Paiva here, Hiking Stars. This is my channel, and today we'll be talking about Chiron. So, hey, finally, I've been working in this video for a while. If you've been following me, you know that. If you haven't been following, welcome. I hope this is rich with information that's going to be useful for you, because Chiron is actually very fascinating. And it was really inspiring, actually, all of this research. So, before we get in, I'll give you a little intro of what we're going to be covering in this video. It will be a two-part video. So today, what we're going to be covering here mainly will be the basics. And all of the juicy stuff about Chiron, so we can actually interpret our Chiron transits. I don't do light. It has to be deep. So we're going to dive very deep into Chiron. So we're going to talk a little bit about discovery of Chiron, the cycles of Chiron as well, the myth, so we can understand and extract some meaning from it as well. And then we're going to look into my famous mind maps. I mean, I don't know if they're that famous, but I love them. We'll look into mind maps and all the potential themes that I kind of found in this research about Chiron, and also looking back into transits that I've also had of Chiron and how that emerged and how that came out into my life as well. So we're going to look into themes, how to interpret Chiron, what Chiron can be talking about in charts, which I think is the juiciest bit of this video. And then we'll talk about Chiron in the natal chart. So how can we interpret Chiron and Chiron in the houses as well in the natal chart? So this is all about the natal chart and how to look into Chiron as well based on your birth chart. And then part two, we'll look into transits of Chiron. Okay, I just thought it would be a bit too much to cover all of this in one video. So this will be a two-part. So I'll come up with a second part as well. And don't worry, there'll be timestamps everywhere. You can fast forward, go backwards, watch it, like double the speed as well if you prefer to see things faster. And I'll make it very detailed as well, so you won't miss out on what the content is in this video. So before we start as well, shout out that I have used a lot of Melanie Ringhart's ideas. This one is Chiron and the Healing Journey, an astrological and psychological perspective. Is an old version here in this book, an older edition. I'm sure there's like newer editions out there that you can grab, and I highly recommend. I've had the opportunity to see Melanie Reinhardt's lecture once, and I just really love her work and the intuitive way that she works with astrology as well. So I've used a lot of her work as inspiration to a lot of the ideas that we're going to be discussing today. And that's it. Let's move on. Let's talk about Chiron. So first thing that I want to talk about is the discovery, as I did with all of the other videos I did, because we can find some resonance, something about what was going on or how the planet was discovered that tells us a lot about the symbolism as well of the planet astrologically. So what I thought was very cool as well is that you can actually cast the chart of when Chiron was discovered. So Chiron was discovered when the sun was in Scorpio. So there's some very interesting things there. We also have Pluto on the North Node, if I'm not wrong, as well with the chart, because I obviously casted the chart. So we got Pluto North Node in Libra and the midheaven in Libra as well. And we have three planets, I think Mercury, Uranus, and the Sun in Scorpio as well. So Chiron was discovered on the 1st of November, 1977 at 10 a.m. apparently in Pasadena, California. So I just thought it was nice to share here with you as well. If you're like me, if you like to cast charts for everything and see if you can get any insights, there it is. Now, what was interesting about the discovery bit is that it was reclassified many times. Like, it was very difficult to just get to a conclusion and say, right, this is an asteroid, this is a comet. No, this is a planet. So there's a lot of discussion there on what Chiron actually is. And when I studied as well, we talked about Chiron as a planetoid. So it's something in between a planet and an asteroid. And so that in itself already contains a little bit of the symbolism of what Chiron represents in our chart. So something that's really difficult to classify, something that's a bit difficult to pin down as well, is a little bit of an outsider element of our personality that Chiron is representing there as well. So what Melanie Reinhardt says is that Chiron symbolizes that which is hidden by virtue of being so obvious, and that it also resists classification, categorization, and it defies description in astrology as well. So there's lots of debates of what Chiron rules and what Chiron doesn't rule, and I know astrologers that don't even use Chiron that much. So I thought that was very on point with the symbolism of how we use Chiron in our charts as well. So I thought that was cool, and that was thought-provoking to share with you in here as well. So another thing that she says about this discovery, which I thought was important or cool kind of to mention here as well, is that it was the first time that astrologers and astronomers cooperated to name it. So that was a kind of a cooperation between the two. And in that sense, that also symbolizes some of the major themes of Chiron, which is bridging splits, bridging dualities, bridging the seemingly oppositions that we have inside us. So Chiron kind of talks about that quite a bit. And so the fact that astronomers and astrologers came together to name it sort of represents a little bit of what Chiron is about astrologically as well. So in terms of the cycle of Chiron, so Chiron has a very, very elliptical orb, and is, you know, is a little bit like Pluto has a very elliptic orb as well, and so it stays in signs for longer or shorter as well. So we don't have a very precise cycle like we have for Saturn or, you know, some of the other planets as well. So Chiron takes about 50 years to go around. So when you're around 50, you have your Chiron return. And what happens is that Chiron spends 8 years in some signs and 2 years in other signs. So we have this sort of disproportionate time that Chiron will spend in some of the signs. So for example, Pisces and Aries has an 8-year cycle, 8-year period, so that Chiron will be in each of them, 8 years in Aries, 8 years in Pisces. And then when it comes to Virgo and Libra, it's just 2 years. So maybe you might be thinking, great, when I'm a Virgo, I'm not having a conjunction for too long. But then in Pisces, in opposition, will be there for a long time. Anyhow, so this is kind of like the cycles there. Another way to see is that Chiron is sort of in between Saturn and Uranus, and that also represents that Chiron can bridge the themes of Saturn and Uranus as well. So the shadows that Saturn represents and the sort of maverick side as well. So between the shadow and the criticism of Saturn with the sort of vision of Uranus as well, and being the maverick, being an outsider as well, Chiron is sort of in between these two different topics, and it could be a way to kind of integrate these two energies in our charts. So this is the cycles bit as well. So let's talk a little bit about the myth. So you see, I'm kind of not spending too much time here because I love the symbolic bit, and that's where I actually want to spend most of my time in this video. So in terms of the mythology, in Greek mythology, the centaurs, which is what Chiron is, Chiron was a centaur, they were known as a tribe of unruly creatures. And I have had dreams about centaurs, which were they were quite unruly in my dreams as well. So there's this sort of half horse, half man creature, and only a few of them have names, but there is loads of stories and mythology of them like invading weddings and like just destroying everything and killing everyone, and, you know, violence just, you know, running rampant and things like that. But only a few of them are known by their names, and Chiron is probably the most well-known of them. Chiron is known as the wounded healer. And why is Chiron known as the wounded healer? I think this is one of the biggest bits of his mythology and his mythological story, really. But before we get to that point of him being called the wounded healer, Chiron was the son of Saturn and a water or a sea nymph. Now, what happened is that Saturn kind of turned into a horse to pursue the sea nymph. You know how there's like gods turn into all sorts of things, especially Zeus. in order to pursue their like conquests. So he turned into a horse, and the sea nymph was also in a horse shape when they conceived Chiron. So when she got impregnated with Chiron, they were both in horse shape, and that's why Chiron was born half horse and half human. So he was a demigod. He wasn't really a god, but he also wasn't really human. And because the nymphs, if I'm not wrong, they do die. They are not eternal. They have like a 9,000 years lifespan, and they live very, very long, but they do die. So in mythology, anyways. So he was born half horse, and what happened is that he got rejected. So this, again, that's another theme of Chiron that's sort of emerging from the story there, the theme of rejection. And Chiron in our charts, we're talking about something that we rejected within ourselves, or that we felt rejected by, or, you know, there is a story of rejection, or where we reject something about our nature, where our instincts are hurt somehow, or rejected, or not embraced, or not integrated. So there's something about that. And, you know, and in the mythology, he gets rejected by both his parents. So his mom was really shocked that she gave birth to such a monstrous creature, and she decided to be, you know, she asked to be transformed into anything else other than the monster's mom. And so he was left alone and quite sad, but he was rescued by the god Apollo. So Apollo is the sun god, and he's also the god of healing, music, and prophecy. And so Apollo rescues and raises Chiron. So Chiron learned all of these different arts, the healing arts, music, and, you know, prophecy as well. And so he became kind of a teacher figure, really. And Hercules was one of his students. And there are a few different versions in the myth of how Chiron gets wounded. But one of the versions, or like my favorite version maybe, is that it kind of happened by mistake. It wasn't a real fight that he had with Hercules or anything, but he did get wounded by mistake. So Hercules wounded him accidentally with an arrow with Hydra's poison. And Hydra was one of the monsters of one of the labors that Hercules had to do, one of those really difficult labors. And Hydra is actually connected with the mythology, or the pattern of Scorpio, because Hercules had this huge monster that he had to kill, and every time he chopped a head, another, I don't know how many, would come up in its place. And so it was like hundreds of heads. And so he realizes that he needed to lift it up from the mud. It was the only way to actually kill the Hydra, to chop the heads and not have other heads growing and replacing it. So that's interesting, and I love this. Is on the Astrology of Fate by Lise Green, that she says is very much connected with the mythological pattern of Scorpio, the Hydra, and that we need to take our shadows out of the unconscious in order to be able to wrestle it. Because if we keep it in the mud, I don't know how many other heads will keep growing out of it. So this is just a little digression. But anyhow, so with the poison from Hydra, which became a bit of a weapon really for Hercules after he killed it, he wounded Chiron's thigh. Now, thigh is another thing that we connect with Sagittarius, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But so he got wounded, and because he was a demigod, Chiron, that is, because he was a demigod, he couldn't die, but he also couldn't heal the poison either. So, you know, he sort of, the way that he found the solution was changing its place with Prometheus. So Prometheus had stolen the fire from the gods and given to humans, and he was attached to this rock, and he had his liver eaten every night, and, you know, it will grow again and it would be eaten, and he was like eternally suffering. So he changed place with Prometheus, and that's how he finally died. And then he became a constellation, but you know, he became a cluster of stars and etc. But there are a few powerful things here in the, you know, even in the sense of him replacing Prometheus, that talks about Chiron as well. So the only way to get over the wounds that Chiron represents in our charts is by being extremely empathetic, and empathetic with people, but with ourselves as well. So there's something about the sense of empathy and the sense of understanding suffering that is also very much clustered around Chiron and Chiron in our charts. So that's there. Now, another thing that happened, because Chiron, and I want to mention before we move on from the myth, because Chiron was wounded and he was searching for he was searching for healing, really, how he could heal that wound that he never managed to. He ended up studying a lot of different healing arts and finding out a lot of things that he could actually offer to other people. So the whole wounded healer kind of comes from that, really, that he was wounded. He was searching for a way of healing his own wound, and instead of being able to heal the wounds, he found a lot of different techniques that he could use and relieve people's suffering and heal other people. So some of you there might already feel a sense of resonance with this, and especially, I find that Chiron tends to be very prominent if you're highly sensitive, if you're an empath, if you work with any of these like mediumship or any of this sensitive careers or vocations. Even if you're a doctor as well, you actually might resonate very strongly with Chiron, because you ended up doing all of this stuff because you were searching for relief for your own wounds, for your own suffering, and then you have a lot to share with other people as well. So there's a lot of people, I think, that will be resonating with Chiron today, like watching this video. And I certainly did resonate with a lot of things. And it was very revealing. I don't think we give enough attention to Chiron, or we give enough, we look at it with the respect that maybe it needs. So this research was particularly interesting because of that. So let's move on. That was what I had to say about myth. Let's move on to the mind maps and what are the themes. So I'm just going to roll with this. I have a few different pages here of topics that are really connected with Chiron, and let's hope that my Mercury in Virgo can make sense out of it and you can get the best out of all of this information and those few weeks of research as well that I've done. So the first, thing that comes to mind, obviously, is healing. So healing is something that's clustered around Chiron, that's connected with Chiron, and healing of all sorts. Healing ourselves, healing others, healing the environment. These idea, or these archetype, really, of the wounded healer, is like something that we suffer very much. This is going to be reflected in our charts. Whatever Chiron is something that we don't know, but we really suffer. I think Saturn carries a little bit this sort of sense of something that we don't know, something that we're not so good at, but we master it. We do tend to master Saturn in our charts. And I think this is something that Lise Green says a lot in her books as well, whereas Chiron is something that's there, is a wound that's there, is a kind of a non-negotiable. And what we can do is transmute this wound into something. And this is the way I like to work with Chiron as well, because if, the sense of a wound that's non-negotiable and is always going to be there seems a little bit disempowering for me to think about it in that way. I actually quite like to think about Chiron as something that we can offer to others, and that we can strengthen our connection with the sign and the house of Chiron and express it in a more elevated form. So we've got the worst, the best, and all the colors in between, right, when it comes to astrology. So I still really strong believing that with Chiron or with any of the other planets as well. So healing is definitely strong there. And if you have a strong Chiron in your chart, that's going to be one of your identities, strong aspect between Chiron and the sun, or Chiron your ascendant. Like, this is going to be very powerful. So that which we can do for others but not for ourselves, this is one of the things that Melanie Reinhardt says in the book, and I think that's the beginning of the journey. It's something that we cannot do for ourselves, but we do for others. Now, I think that as we get older and as we get all of these different transits by Chiron, maybe we actually start learning how to do that as well. And change the manifestation of our Chirons as well. I don't think that necessarily we're never going to know how to do the Chiron where Chiron is. I think that that is a very sensitive place in our charts, and we're always going to feel very sensitive about it. But because of that, we end up studying a lot, looking, researching, going to classes, developing a kind of an ability to help other people to do that. But I do think that that has an influence on us as well. So I'm going to politely disagree with the Melanie Reinhardt and Liz Green as well. So it has a connection with medicine and music. So this is all in the same like kind of balloon there of the healing. It has a connection with medicine and music. And this ability to help others was increased by, oh, this is what I just said with the mythology as well. So his ability to help others was increased by his continual search for relief. So because of our wound and our need to search for relief, we usually find a lot of material that we end up sharing with a lot of people. So in that sense, Chiron can really have something to do with your vocation as well. And that's another thing that I will when I get there, but keep that in mind as we explore this. So that's kind of the healing there. Now, Chiron helps to integrate powerful experiences connected. Oh, I thought that was quite rich as well. So Chiron helps to integrate powerful experiences connected with outer planets, and especially Pluto, according to Melanie. So, you know, it's almost like, according to her, Chiron is an emissary, an agent, or escapee of Pluto. So Pluto, it kind of resonates with the themes of Pluto, of regeneration, of death and rebirth, and, you know, going through the dark side in order to emerge re-empowered, you know, all of that sort of resonates with Chiron as well. And that Chiron has this ability, or gives us this ability to integrate some of these transpersonal themes, because Chiron isn't really transpersonal. Again, remember, Chiron is very difficult to define, and so it travels between worlds somehow, just like a shaman does, which is another theme connected to Chiron. And we will definitely touch on that, but let's keep going. So Chiron, our charts will help to integrate powerful outer planets, especially Pluto's experiences. So Chiron is our impulse to individuate as well. So the impulse to become ourselves, the impulse to be unique, or to, you know, do our thing in the world, is sort of clustered in Chiron as well. And to individuate beyond collective pressures. So our need to kind of go beyond all of these sort of collective ideas, ideals, or, you know, expectations. Again, the house and the sign that you have in your chart will give us more clues about how you do that. What sort of collective ideas or ideals are you more sensitive to, and that you can really transgress or transcend and find your own way of doing and dealing with it. So Chiron will be talking about rites of passage as well, and purification, and in particular, Chiron transits. So when we're having a strong Chiron transit, so all of you with Aries sun there, with Chiron transiting your sun, or Chiron transiting your ascendant, or, you know, a square, something in your chart as well, there's bound to be a strong rite of passage. And if you have a powerful Chiron in your chart already, then that's a kind of a trigger to your path as well, potentially, you know. I mean, I had multiple transits in 2013, and it was a massive time of stretch and challenges and, you know, growth and etc., which I hope I'll be able to share as well eventually one day, maybe with a book or something. But I went back to see if I was having a Chiron transit at the time, because everything I was reading about rites of passages and the sense of purification, the sense of getting into a cocoon, needing to go into exile and detach from social, you know, social expectations and social life, and just, you know, being buried alive, which is one of the, you know, initiations in some of these shamanic practices. So I had to kind of go back and check, and I was having like Chiron transit. So I was like, retracing some of my own transits, and it was very powerful. Like those times when I had those Chiron transits, I really had some very strong, powerful things that were happening, and that really triggered my path, like triggered who I am now. And like, it's not even triggered who I am, but like definitely started the journey. It really kicked me strong enough to get me into the journey that sort of brought me where I am now, you know, made me who I am. Perhaps it's just chipping away what I wasn't in a very intense and powerful way, but it definitely felt like a sense of initiation. So you might be having something like that as well. I don't know, share with me. Let me know in the comments, how is this going for you? How do you feel about that? So definitely the sense of rites of passage and purification, anything to do with death, transition, and the conscious acceptance of death as well is clustered with Chiron as well, and with this sense of rites of passage. And you can see there the resonation, like the resonation with the Pluto, right? And how we can integrate Pluto by having these chironic experiences as well, because death is something that we usually attribute to Pluto as well. So Chiron has that resonance, and Chiron is this sort of sense of conscious acceptance of death through illness, through something that's going on. And it might be illness of the soul, you know, mental illness or physical illness, chronic illness, something that happens to us that really brings us closer to death in a way, like to realizing that we are not immortal. And is a humbling experience as well, I guess. Is like, you know, getting us down to our knees and realizing that, and the humanness that sort of connects all of us as well, and so perhaps triggers the desire to give it back as well, you know, through that process. But there's definitely this sense of the conscious acceptance of death through very strong chironic transits and times. And in a way, together with this balloon, there is the spiritual development, you know, is our urge to develop spiritually is clustered in Chiron there. Although, you know, we can think about Neptune as a sort of a spiritual longing and a collective longing. I think Chiron, because it's also the trigger for individuation, is also connected with spiritual development that's more individuated, let's put it that way. So again, if you have a powerful Chiron in your chart, then you'll probably be more connected to that spiritual realm and want to develop spiritually more than others, you know. So illness is also clustered there, and obviously clustered with the death and transition, and what I just said as well, or I just mentioned about illness being this sort of trigger into spiritual development, into searching for meaning in life as well. That's Chiron. You know, Chiron is our search for understanding and meaning during illness. That's Chiron as well, right? That's the role of Chiron. So facing our mortality is in Chiron as well from that perspective. Another one here with Chiron is exile. So feeling different, feeling like an outsider, not understood. So whichever house Chiron is in our charts, we have this sense of misunderstanding, being misunderstood, being in exile, not really being like anyone else. So Chiron in the 11th house, I think, would have that very highlighted, you know, the sense of not belonging and feeling very different from most. Chiron is also the significator for disability. And in fact, Melanie Reinhardt, she says that when Chiron was discovered in 77, there was this huge, there were huge achievements around awareness for disability as well, that, you know, disabled people had rights as well, and, you know, they just shouldn't be invisible. And Chiron was discovered around that time. So I think that is also an interesting reflection there. So disability and wounds, I think, go together as well with that sense of illness there as well. The other point of Chiron, it can be physical, spiritual, psychological. Again, that's written there. So Chiron will, this is the last one for this one, but I've got two more mind maps. So Chiron will be reflective of parts of us that have split off. So our dualities, there's usually a theme about rejecting the instincts, which is what happened, you know, in the mythology of Chiron being rejected by, here's parents. I think there is a little bit of that in us, reflected by where Chiron is and what sign Chiron is as well in our chart. So whenever we split off and we reject part of ourselves, we reject sides of ourselves and the dualities that we carry, I think the chart as a whole can reflect duality. So let's say you have a lot of Aquarius, but you also have a lot of Scorpio, you know, those are like dualities that will be reflected there, like a very rational side and a very emotional, intense, you know, in search for very deep intimacy, for example, and the other side wanting freedom. But what Chiron does is to work as a potential bridge. So what area of life and what sign as well can you work out your splits? So we can give some clues about all of the splits that we have in our charts as well, and how we can integrate. And Chiron itself can give us clues about what splits we have, I believe, but it's very much connected with this sense of splits and dualities and paradoxes as well. Like how can we hold paradox? Because, you know, paradox is unavoidable, I guess. So then transits of Chiron become opportunities for soul retrieval. I think that's one of the very important parts here that you need to take with you from this video, is that transits are soul retrieval opportunities to really reclaim these bits that have been disowned, that have been rejected, and that are in exile within your own psyche. So this is like the benefit that Chiron can bring, and why it is related to individuation as well. So transits in that way, I've got a couple of more notes here before we get into the next mind map, but transits are seen as initiation. So as I'm saying about the soul retrieval, Melanie Reinhardt says that there are periods of reorientation. So strong, powerful Chiron transits can be a time of reorientating yourself and rebirthing our sense of fertility as well through Chiron transits. They are connected with our primal wounds and with a sense of expanding consciousness as well, by entering into the archetypal realms. I think during a Chiron transit, because it can be so powerful, it can sort of initiate us into an archetypal realm. And I would be really interested in hearing from your experiences as well, of something, you know, if you can trace it back, if you can look into Chiron transits in the past that may have kicked, you know, the process of you developing your mediumship or your ability to do something for others as well, and how you threw yourself into the process. I'll be very, very curious and interested. Certainly during these intense Chiron transits, especially the last one, that's when I read a lot about alchemy, and I did a lot of like alchemical psychological work, and I started doing therapy and seeing a Jungian psychologist. And there was this huge thing that happened within me, and I had so many vivid dreams as well. And again, I had multiple transits, so hands down that was it's quite hard to pin down into where it was coming from, you know, because Neptune was also opposite my Mercury. But there is definitely that sense of soul retrieval, and I read a lot about that, you know, the split of the soul and initiations, and how that psychologically can also happen to us. So I'd be really, really curious, you sensitive souls out there, highly sensitive, if you're an empath, did you have an initiation? Do you remember a few years that you were having that? And can you go back and see where Chiron was? And if you can't, do you want to share in the comments and I can help you trace it? So I'm just going to put that there. So Chiron, the chart will be this intense search. So the area, the house where Chiron is, will be the area of life where we're initially blocked, wounded, poorly functioning, but also where we have a unique individual contribution. So Chiron, that's why we can relate Chiron to individuation, because Chiron represents our unique individual contribution. And because it's so painful, it means a lot to us, because we know how it feels not to have it. We know how it feels to be like wonky and, you know, poorly functioning, and the sense of woundedness as well, just like Chiron did. with the poisoned arrow, you know, in the leg. So the quality of the process is in the sign, right? So quality is in the sign of our inner journey of healing. So the sign represents the quality of this inner journey of healing as well. So if Chiron is in Gemini, will be a certain quality, will be very intellectual. And in fact, I journaled intensely during that period when I had the Chiron transit, when I had multiple transits. Journaling. It was very, very intense. Jotted down so many thoughts, wrote down dreams, wrote down, like, writing was really healing and helpful, and reading as well. I needed to read about these experiences, and so it was very, very intellectually soothing. That was how I found my way through. That's how I navigated that. So that Chiron, you know, Chiron Taurus might be body work. It might be massages and, you know, all the Taurian things, all of the sensual things that can really help you during these journeys as well. So basically, Chiron transits, powerful Chiron transits, will summon intense transpersonal experiences. That's how she says, and I think it really encapsulates, because that's what I had when I had these transits as well. I do really feel that it did summon intense transpersonal experiences. So it's great to know that, right? So we can navigate these transits in the best way that we can. So let's go to my next mind map. We're still in the mind map bit here. And so I think there's like issues of meaning on personal suffering and service will be reflective of Chiron. And so the quest for the meaning of our lives is triggered by Chiron as well, because it's triggered by suffering. And I think it's widely common knowledge there that, you know, sometimes human beings just move because of suffering, isn't it? It's like, if we're suffering enough, we'll make a move and we'll change something. If we're comfortable, we'll stay there, right? We usually stay if it's comfortable. So I put HSP with a question mark, but I don't think it needs that question mark very much. I do really strongly believe that HSPs and empaths will be strongly chironic people. All right. And the HSP, I think, and the empath, because the quest for meaning is intrinsically part of our lives. Like, you know, some people don't need that as much. They can get by, they can do their daily jobs, you know, cater for their families, do their thing, you know, go for their holidays, and that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with it. But I think one of the major characteristics of HSPs and empaths is searching for meaning very early on, and like trying to understand what's the meaning of all of this, and why are we here, why are we doing what we're doing, and, you know, how can we be more mindful of what we're doing and more conscious of what we're doing as well. So that's clustered in Chiron. Chiron will be the process of accepting our wounds as well. And Chiron is also our primal wounds. So if you want to go back in past, if you want to understand what happened in your life, how your early life affected you, Chiron will kind of be reflective of that too. Is that process of healing the split that I mentioned before, but we can think about the split, especially in terms of spiritual instinctual. You know how, like, sometimes we see very strong splits between, you know, the spiritual and the instinctual. So it's like the instinctual is lower and we need to be spiritual and transcend everything. And, you know, that's why I don't like this idea of transcending the chart very much, because it does kind of reinforces this sense of split where the instinctual realm, the realm of the body, is lower, is less evolved. And as a Virgo, an earthy sun, an earthy person, I don't like that very much. So the healing of the split between spiritual and instinctual, between civilized and uncivilized, and this process of reconciling painful opposites, which I mentioned already. The theme of sacrifice is Neptunian, but is also Chironic, and the sense of sacrifice as a way to redeem something, as a way to heal something, as a way to create more healing in the world, you know, that's also Chironic as well. And I guess whenever there is a theme of sacrifice, there's also a theme of boundaries and how we set boundaries. How do we do boundaries? How do we have that, right? I think that's important to talk about. The principle of like cures like is chironic as well. So homeopathy is very chironic as well in that regard, because homeopathy works with that principle. And is also the principle of psychological repetition. Now that's very interesting, because I'm sure you have noticed that as well, that you attract the same type of people. You know, it's like you attract unavailable partners, and you attract unavailable partners and again, or you attract situations where people don't listen to your ideas, and they just don't listen, and they just don't respect your, you know, your presence in the place, or they're like, all variables are possible here, depending of who we are, what our charts reflect about us, and also how we conduct that by being the unique beings that we are. But we all have gone through that, I'm sure. Repeated patterns, things that come back and happen again and again and again. And so those are chironic as well. And it's very revealing to see that as well, because that's the wounding. And that sense of something repeating. So let's say you've been abandoned by your father, and so you keep attracting, you know, a certain type of man into your life, and that's the wound trying to be healed by the repetition principle, by a similar topic or a similar wounding. And so that's a great pointer there for us, as hard as it is, as wounding as the whole thing is, and as challenging as, you know, this is, there is hope. Because if something is repeating, then there's something there for us to look closer. And, you know, in the chironic fashion, there's a wound that's trying to be cured by this sort of repetition there. So if we look at it, if we work with it, if we take responsibility for what's happening as well, then maybe we can transform it, and we can embrace Chiron in a better way. We can serve with our Chirons rather than just inflict the same wound again and again in ourselves. All right. So that I thought was very cool as well. Chiron relates also to the archetypes, you know, wounded, victim, wounder, persecutor. So sometimes it's also how we wound, and that was also a revelation. So Chiron isn't just our wounds, isn't just where I'm hurting, but is also how I hurt others. Yeah. So wounder and persecutor is there in that Chiron. Healer, savior, and rescuer. This is also constellated in that Chiron as well in our charts. Okay, so again, there's a kind of a resonance with Neptune there a little bit, but I think that's self-explanatory. I don't need to go too much into that one, excuse me. This one is also quite cool. So Chiron will be reflective of qualities that are perceived in us, that we sometimes don't see it. And is that sense of we don't have it, but we end up actually having enough to offer to others as well, and embrace it as some kind of service that we can offer to others. So people usually perceive it in us. So if we have Chiron Mercury, we're usually very eloquent, and other people see it, and we don't see it because we feel wounded in our communication, right? And I do have Chiron Mercury. And I oftentimes do get like many comments about eloquence and, you know, expressing myself really well and etc. But it's almost like an obsession, you know. I need to express myself as clearly as possible, because it is very painful if I don't. So anyhow, qualities that are perceived in us is also clustered in Chiron. So Chiron can also be our inner teacher, our inner guide, our inner prophet, and our inner physician as well, in a way. You know, we can tap into that for, you know, searching for cures and, you know, advices and etc. And Chiron can be related to our vocation as well. Again, if we have a very strong Chiron, we're going to resonate strongly with vocations that are chironic. So the shaman in some way, you know, journey of suffering, death, rebirth, and return, you know, and having a direct access to realms of the sacred. That's what shaman is. And so if you do spiritual work of some kind, if you're sort of visiting these other realms there, which is kind of chironic. No, ironic, chironic. The healer, obviously, you're healing. If you're a massage therapist, if you are, doing Reiki or all sorts of like healing techniques there, including medicine, to be honest, because I do feel that people that go into medicine, they want to, they want to heal other people, they want to help other people. So there are healers as well. So shaman, the healer, the intermediary, somehow you're intermediating things and you're in between worlds like a shaman is. Diviner, so divination is also very chironic. Visionary, seeing things and receiving information before others and sharing those informations. You see, that's why I see empath and the HSP kind of related there as well. Herbalist, because Chiron is known for in mythology to have created, is like the father of herbalism, trying to search for the cure of his own wound. Nice. And any planet and aspect to Chiron will appear to be dominant in our lives as well. So if we have a, Chiron Mercury, Chiron Moon, Chiron something, that planet tends to be quite dominant in the life of its owner. Okay, so here is my last mind map here with Chiron as well, so continuing the mind map theme here. So apparently some researchers in the astrological community linked Chiron also with something to do with the process of incarnation and reincarnation. I guess that makes sense, because if that's your belief system, okay, so I think that makes sense, because if Chiron has to do with soul retrieval, with everything that's being split and, separated in our psyches, then I guess this is also about incarnation, reincarnation, because that's what we're sort of trying to do. If we do believe in reincarnation, we're sort of trying to do soul retrieval, right? We're trying to become more wholesome somehow. We're learning things. We're reclaiming bits of ourselves that have been disowned or that has stayed in past lives as well, is stuck in other patterns. So that sort of resonates as well, it makes sense. Chiron is also clustering inheritance from our parents. So, and apparently this is especially strong, according to Melanie, if Chiron is in aspect to Saturn as well in the chart. So all the inheritance, all the wounded inheritance, like I'm not just talking about inheritance as in like you get, some money from your parents or something like that, but actual psychological and spiritual wounds as well. We're sort of carrying that theme through our Chirons. Chiron is the doorway between the personal and transpersonal. That's being touched already when I talked about the relationship to Pluto as well. Chiron will be talking about the nature of our contribution to life, what we'll be remembered for. And I think this is a little bit on the little balloon of vocation as well, I think, is what we have to contribute, is what we have to offer. And what in as a result to that will be remembered for is very, very much connected to our Chirons. Chiron has been linked in the astrological community, in astrology. Chiron has been linked to Virgo and Sagittarius. I'm not going to go into very much because I don't know. I guess the Saturnian side of myself likes the traditional rulerships. I don't want Chiron to rule Virgo or to rule Sagittarius. I'd rather stay with what we already have. I think what we have works very well. But just so you know, it has been connected to Virgo and Sagittarius as well. So it has a resonance with these two signs. And we can see why, right? If you think about healing, service, that's very Virgoan. If we think about meaning, searching for meaning, understanding the meaning of things, the meaning of suffering, I think that's Sagittarian as well in nature. And also the fact that it's a centaur. I mean, a centaur is the symbol of Sagittarius. So there's a resonance in there. I can see why, and I see why I've put into my mind map as well. And the last thing here from the mind map which is also interesting, and it kind of gives us a perfect hook to move on to the natal chart, is the midpoint. So apparently the midpoint between Saturn and Uranus, and there are ways you can find that out, and there are ways you can find the midpoint between your Saturn and Uranus. You can calculate if you're blessed with a mind for numbers. I think that's where my Chiron is in mathematics. You can do it yourself. Just calculate the exact midpoint, the exact middle between your Chiron and your Uranus. But there are ways that you can check that on astro.com or other astrological softwares as well, if you have access to them. And apparently this is very Chiron sensitive. So that point, that degree of the zodiac in your chart will be very Chiron sensitive. So just leave that there as well for you to do your own research and to find how that works for you. And if you have a planet in that degree, that will give us even more clue about Chiron and how you express Chiron in your life. It will be tinged with a little bit of Chiron. Okay, nice. So this is what I had for the mind map and the themes, and sort of brainstorming here together what we can, what we can see about Chiron, what we can think about Chiron as a principle, as an archetype, right? And again, it will be very personal how much you feel of this or that, and it depends on different times of your life as well, etc. But let's move on to Chiron, the natal chart, and how can we interpret Chiron in the natal chart as well. All right. So if you want to not isolate, but if you want to understand Chiron, you need to look at obviously the sign where Chiron is, the ruler of that sign. So what we're talking about here is the Chiron complex. Okay, and what will give you more and more clues about your Chiron, the detective work of your natal Chiron. So sign, the ruler of that sign. So let's say my Chiron is in Gemini. So the ruler of Gemini is Mercury. So where is Mercury? What Mercury is doing, etc., etc. All planets in angles that are aspected by Chiron. This is also going to be part of your Chiron complex. The house where Chiron is in, obviously, that's a very important one too. The sign on the cusp of that house as well. So if you have Chiron in the second house, and the cusp of your second house is in Gemini, then that sign will also be tinged with Chiron for you. And the ruler of that Gemini will also be bringing forward some Chironic or Chiron themes as well. All right. So the sign on the cusp and the house ruler, the planetary pair that have Chiron in their midpoint. Ooh, that's a very interesting one too. So let's say the midpoint of your sun and your moon is whatever 25 Scorpio, and then your Chiron is a 25 Scorpio. Well, that's something very important there. That Chiron will definitely have a very important influence on how you bring the two different themes of the sun and the moon into play as well. I mean, the midpoint of the sun and the moon is a particularly important one because it's your sense of identity there. So you would definitely be a very, strongly influenced by Chiron type of individual, really. So, but in general, if Chiron is in the midpoint of your Mars and your Saturn, or your Venus and your Saturn, or, there are all sorts of potentials there, but it's just getting a bit more complex here. But just in case, if you're a little bit more advanced and you're interested in doing some of that research, go for it and let me know what you find out, because information is meant to be shared, says the Mercury Chiron person. Okay. So let's have a look at Chiron by house, which is the last point of this video. I am getting a little bit tired, and I can tell. I'm glad I'm not doing the transits in this one. But let's talk about Chiron in the house, in the natal chart. This is all the natal chart, okay? So Chiron by house will be reflective of lessons we're meant to learn. Lessons that we're meant to learn through crisis, through sickness, that people have reported to her. So these situations, so let me rephrase it here for you. So Chiron the house will be reflective of the lessons that we're meant to learn through crisis and sickness. But this one, the way that I'm going to share with you, was from Melanie Reinhardt's book, and is what she was saying that people reported to her. So people with certain Chiron, so basically it's based on her data, that people that had Chiron specific houses reported crisis and, you know, illnesses and etc. That taught them a lesson. And they all resonated with this specific lesson based on the house that they have Chiron natally. All right, excuse me. So let's go house by house, and you can get that flavor there. So Chiron in the first house, what the lesson was about appropriate initiative or action. So after a period of crisis, a period of sickness, a period of something that was going on, they realized that they needed, you know, to learn about appropriate initiative or action. So Chiron in the second house, the lesson was about appropriate values or use of resources. So they've learned about using the resources and, you know, their values as well through crisis and sickness. If Chiron is in the third house, the lessons were about appropriate communication, thought, and speech as well. So something that happened that threw them back at themselves, or something that was going on that really taught them about appropriate communication. With people that have Chiron in the fourth house natally, and through a crisis, through something that was going on, and usually this crisis is by having a Chiron transit as well, okay? But the natal Chiron will be telling you what that lesson is, what is the nature of that lesson. So Chiron in the fourth house was appropriate emotional bonds and attitude to family. That was the lesson through crisis and pain and suffering, etc. With Chiron in the fifth, the lessons was around appropriate self-expression and creativity. So something that made them realize, you know, self-expression and creativity there. Chiron in the sixth house will be lessons about appropriate service to others and respect for the body as well. That was the lesson. Chiron in the seventh house will be appropriate relationships. So after big crises and etc., will be appropriate relationships. Chiron in the eighth house natally will be lessons about appropriate attitude to death and sexuality as well. So this is what the lesson was about after crisis, sickness, and etc. Mainly through some kind of Chiron transit there. Chiron in the ninth house was about appropriate attitude to possibilities, and I would say to worldview as well, because that's Chiron, you know, that's the ninth house, isn't it? It's our bigger picture, is how we see the world, right? How we attribute meaning to life and to the world, and our beliefs as well in general, you know. With Chiron natally in the 10th, the lessons that we're meant to learn through crisis and sickness, etc., is about appropriate vocation and participation in society. You got Chiron in the 10th? Let me know. And then Chiron in the 11th house, we'll be talking about the lessons we're meant to learn through crisis and sickness around appropriate ideals and friendships as well. And last but not least, Chiron in the 12th house will be teaching us lessons that we're meant to learn through crisis and sickness about appropriate renunciation. It's a 12th house, isn't it? It's like renunciation is about the spiritual realm. It's about entering this other realm, letting go, letting flow, not controlling so much. This is all also to keep in mind. This is also important to think that Chiron in the natal chart has a relationship to the opposite house and to the opposite sign as well. So because we feel wounded in the sign that Chiron is and the house that Chiron is in our charts, we tend to overdo the other end of it, the other side of it. Sometimes, that's how we feel better about these wounds that we carry. So it's important to look at the opposite house and the opposite sign as well when we're doing these sort of interpretations. All right. And to finish this as well, the way that you look at the sign of Chiron in your chart as well, and the way that she says, the sign sort of represents, what the sign represents in our charts, is a way of being which supports us in the area of life represented by Chiron's house. So it's a way of being that we're using to support us in the wounds in the area of life that the house will be talking about, right? And so what she said as well, which I thought was important to mention here to you as well, or like that was good to share with you as well, is that the sign provides a bandage. So the sign will give us a bandage. You see how I was telling you that during my Chiron transit, I became very intensely connected with writing and reading and writing and journaling and all the Gemini things. They were like a sort of a bandage around the wounds as well. So the sign can provide this sort of bandage over our wounds. And usually these bandages removed during transits as well, strong Chiron transits. So we really get in touch with the wounds underneath a 7th house, or 7th house. That's where I have my Chiron. Our Chiron house in the, in our charts. So that's it. I can see my brain's getting scrambled, and that's because I've already shared a wealth of information here about Chiron. Let me know in the comments what bit of this resonated the most with you. What did you take? What are your takings from this video? What are you most interested in as well? And if you have a strong, powerful Chiron in your chart as well, let me know. I'm very interested, and I will be coming back with part 2, which will be about transiting Chiron, current transiting Chiron. So Chiron is at 19 degrees Aries. So let's have a look at where that's transiting in your chart based on your ascendant. I'll be doing that soon, and I'll share it with you. In the meantime, let me know how you're doing, what you're finding, what else do you want to learn, what else do you want me to look into, that I'll be very excited to see in the comments there as well. All right, so wishing you all a wonderful time, a wonderful life, a wonderful week, and I'll be seeing you all soon. Bye bye now. Take care.